Obviously, the culture doesn't work. Obviously, pornography doesn't make you happy.
Yeah.
It's a drug. It takes away your freedom.
Yeah.
Well, why do people want it then? Because we've always been insane ever since the fall. Here is sin and here is sanctity, and sanctity always makes you happy, and sin always makes you miserable in the long run. Deep down, we know that by experience.
Yeah.
So why aren't we saints? Because we're nuts.
Hello and welcome to The Naked Gospel, where we have conversations about sex, singleness, marriage, pornography, and everything in between. We bring on cultural thinkers, parents, important folk, and normal folk alike. I am your host, Shane O'Neill. If you're listening in, video versions of all of these episodes are available at YouTube, Proven Ministries. We have that below. If you're watching and you just rather listen in, then all of these episodes are available on every major podcast platform. Whether you're listening or watching, do subscribe and continue to track with us. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the episode. Hey folks, thanks again for joining us today. We are doing another classic replay. It's the conversation with Dr. Peter Kreeft. Dr. Kreeft is, as I mentioned before, a modern marvel. He's written more books than years he's been alive. I have no idea how someone accomplishes that. He's a professor over at Boston College. He's a Catholic thinker. He's brilliant, and you'll see me fumbling around in the conversation. It was a lot of fun. He definitely schooled me, but it is super valuable, and we've been really just encouraged by your feedback. If you'd like to see him back on, let us know in the comments below. If you'd like to see someone else come on, let us know that as well. Continue to like and subscribe, and to support the show, check out the Disruptor Initiative. Partner with us as we disrupt the cultural narratives around us. And continue just to show your support for the show with comments, reviews, whatever. Just grateful for all of you. And let's jump into the conversation with Dr. Kreeft.
Dr. Kreeft, thanks for being here.
For having me.
I know neither of us are terribly good at small talk, so if you're okay with it, we'll just jump right in.
Let's jump right into the meaning of life.
Fantastic.
It'll be deeper than our heads, but that's okay.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. I've been impacted in my own spiritual formation, my own Christian walk, by engaging in something people call the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty, and actively engaging them because it seems like they're always a part of my world, and I'm living into them, or they're impacting me whether I know it or not. So learning to intentionally engage those features of life has gone a long way in shaping me. So I was just wondering if you could take a little while to talk about what the transcendentals are and how they impact us as humans.
Well, they're not features of life like planets or colors or geometry. That's why they're called transcendental. They're everywhere. They're attributes of God, and therefore, like God, they are everywhere. They are ubiquitous or omnipresent. Everything that exists is in some way true, in some way good, and in some way beautiful. And these are the three things that we love and need and want and pant after the most. The three things we're never satisfied with. How many good things do you want? Can't set a limit to that. How many truths do you want? No limit. When do you want to see beauty? Just on Tuesdays? No.
I dig it. Are I guess mental faculties oriented towards these things, or are there specific faculties that align with them? How does that work?
Yes, since both our world and ourselves were designed not in Hollywood or Harvard, but in heaven. And therefore God gave us an intellect to know the truth, and he gave us a will to choose the good, and he gave us emotions and imagination to thrill to beauty.
Yeah, that's helpful. Are they isolated in a kind of a compartmentalized sense? Or are they intertwined, always kind of dancing and reinforcing one another? How do they?
We have only one soul, not three.
Yeah.
But it has many powers. And these are three of its most important powers. And many of us find it difficult to integrate them. For instance, we think that the good is not very beautiful. It's sort of hokey and boring and repressive. And we think that the beautiful is wicked and dangerous and not very good. And we may think that the good is not true. It's just subjective. It's a myth, but it's a useful one. So they're not necessarily integrated well in our psyche, but that's one of life's great tasks, to connect everything that is good and true and beautiful, because all truth is God's truth, and all good is God's good, and all beauty is God's beauty in his own.
Amen. Amen. So looking specifically at beauty, we use, a majority of the time we use a lot of imagination, I reckon, to engage with beauty. And so when it comes to the connection between beauty and imagination, there isn't a lot of aesthetic value. We don't place a lot of value on aesthetics, at least not as Protestants, we don't. But learning to interact with beauty, and not just in a fantastical sense. A lot of pornography and hookup culture is oriented around fantasy, and it seems like we're all using imagination and engaging in beauty, but there hasn't been a priority of intentionally engaging beauty. So it seems to me that we're being exploited by something we're not realizing. And so what is beauty, and how does imagination in particular interact with beauty?
Well, in one sense, beauty is usually prior. It's the first thing we notice, and it's the thing that attracts us the most. Our culture is kind of schizophrenic in that we don't expect true and good things to be beautiful. Most ancient cultures did. In ancient Athens, for instance, you got free room and board in the town hall if you won a prize at the drama contest. We're the best dramatists.
Oh, wow.
We rewarded their art. We expect our artists to starve and to be rebels. That's a shame. Because there's nothing really more beautiful than a saint. And there's nothing more beautiful than truth. For us to reduce beauty to merely physical beauty shows how shallow we are.
I'm curious. I remember reading some time ago. Soren Kierkegaard, he talks a bit about the finite, the finite and the infinite, and how those are two aspects of humanity, in the sense that we're all localized, we're confined by circumstances, we only have so much, volitional power, we're embodied. But then in the infinite sense, we also have longings, desires, and hopes that go beyond our body. And so somebody who emphasizes the finite over the infinite, they end up becoming disillusioned with their hopes and dreams and longings. And so he uses the word despair to characterize what happens there. And then with the
they're suppressing themselves. They're suppressing their own hearts.
Yeah.
You can't help wanting more than you have.
Yeah.
You can't help having a lover's quarrel with the world. So Kierkegaard, I think, is an excellent philosopher for explaining the details of what's often called the argument from desire. We never have enough truth, enough goodness, enough beauty. Every other desire we can satisfy, but that we can't. What does that mean? There's a line in one of Robert Browning's poems that gives the answer. A man's reach must exceed his grasp, or else what's a heaven for? So that's a very strong argument for the existence of something more than this world.
Yeah.
Every desire that springs from the human heart corresponds to something real. For every hunger, there's a food. For every thirst, there's a drink. We're lonely, so there's companionship. We have sexual desires, so there is sex. We're curious, so there is knowledge. Why should these three deepest desires be the only exceptions? We want total truth, total goodness, total beauty. If every other desire can be satisfied except this biggest one of all, then life is a very clever, dirty trick. And some people, nihilists usually, who say life is indeed a dirty trick, they can embrace that, but embrace that.
Yeah. So because he talks about that with the infinite, connecting it with something like fantasy, where people just embrace the infinite, and then they live in kind of a fantasy. And it doesn't take, obviously, kind of desire and longings are, in that argument, are connected with fantasy. And it strikes me as kind of like a post-humanism or a transhumanism, where people just live in this fantasy, whether it's, video games or pornography or whatever. And I was curious to know, because then it doesn't take me much work then to to connect that to beauty and imagination. And so something like C.S. Lewis's argument, The Problem of Pain for desire, how closely associated are longings and desires with beauty in particular?
Well, beauty is one of the three transcendentals. It's in itself infinite. We're never satisfied with finite amounts of it, and yet we cannot imagine the infinite. There's never been a good movie about heaven. All our concepts of heaven are pitiful. We're much better at imagining hell than at imagining heaven. And in our fiction, we're much better at our villains than our heroes. Very difficult to write a good fiction about a saint.
Why would you say that is? I'm actually kind of just, it's a tangent, but why do you think that is when it comes to heroes and villains? Why can we imagine the villain better and thus describe him better than we can heroes?
I don't know the answer to that question. Let me think for a minute. One obvious answer is that we're closer to being a villain than being a hero.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to create your own protagonist in your own image. But since there's a little good in the worst of us, as well as a little bad in the best of us, why is it so hard for us to take the good in us and expand it into heroes? It's so easy for us to take the evil in us and to expand it into villains. I don't know.
Well, thank you for letting me ask.
Ask me again next year.
I will.
It's true.
I will.
It's one of these strange data that doesn't seem to make sense, but you know it's true.
Yeah. I will follow up with you in a year.
I reject simple answers to that question. As the very distinction between good and evil is imaginary and we're making it up. Or the Calvinist doctrine of total depravity, where evil and the good is nothing. Or liberal optimism, where good and evil is nothing.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Yeah. I dig it. I will look you up in a year. How about that? I thank you for letting me ask. I appreciate that. So when it comes to then truth with, I think you mentioned reason earlier. Let's see. So at a macro level, there's kind of a postmodernism of I guess your truth is your truth, right? Like whatever is true to you is whatever.
I just finished writing a 4-volume history of philosophy, and I must say that I have learned something valuable from every single philosophical school in the history of human thought, including perversions like Nazism and communism and even Satanism. The postmodernist school of deconstructionism, I think, is the only philosophy that I find absolutely and totally worthless. It's simply not serious. There is no truth. That's the only truth. Let's deconstruct everything, take everything apart, and rebuild nothing. It's all fake. Well, then that's intellectual suicide.
Yeah.
That's not even the perversion of something good. Skepticism is. Skepticism, which despairs of finding the truth, is at least a desire, and it's the tragic situation that this deep desire to know truth with certainty can never be attained. Something noble about that. It's mistaken and it's tragic, but it rises to the dignity of despair. I don't think deconstructionism does that. I think they're just jerking our chains, playing a game with us, taking their tongue out of us.
Yeah, that's heavy. So I see that at the macro level. Even somebody like Umberto Eco, who says that maybe even like book titles or chapter titles shouldn't be used because it leads people into a kind of frame of reference.
He's not a deconstructionist. He's a little bit of everything. He's all over the place.
Okay. Yeah,
fascinating guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I remember reading that argument, and it baffled me for a few years. And then at the micro level, especially with something like pornography or hookup culture, where people, especially Christians, seem to know it's wrong, yet nonetheless they engage it, and they lie to themselves by saying it only impacts me. I'm single. I'll get, this will go away once I get married.
We're very good at fooling ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So what? I guess my question would be, what is the significance of being truthful and using reason in a way that is truthful? Like, is there any kind of moral merit or value in being honest in the way that you reckon with life?
I'll use Neitzsche as an answer to that question. Neitzsche is probably the most passionate and consistent atheist who ever lived. And he says, I'm going to give you an idea that is the most dangerous idea in the history of human thought. No philosopher has been courageous enough to ask this question. As all other philosophers have said, my system is true and other systems are not true, and they have different systems. I question truth itself. Why truth? Why the will to truth? Why do you want truth? Why not prefer the lie? That's a very strange question because it's unanswerable. Because any answer presupposes that this is the true answer. The very enterprise of questioning and answering presupposes the will to truth. Once you question that, the whole foundation of everything is gone from under your feet. You're in an abyss. And I suspect that in our postmodernist culture, many people are flirting with that abyss.
Yeah.
So they're desperate to get out. So even things they know doesn't work, they cling to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, the culture doesn't work. Obviously, pornography doesn't make you happy.
Yeah.
It's a drug. It takes away your freedom.
Yeah.
Well, why do people want it then? Because we've always been insane ever since the fall. Here is sin and here is sanctity, and sanctity always makes you happy, and sin always makes you miserable in the long run. Deep down, we know that by experience.
Yeah.
So why aren't we saints? Because we're nuts.
Yeah.
God says, here, do you take my right hand? My will be done, and that's the secret of joy, or do you take my left hand? Your will be done, and that's the secret of misery. And our answer is, that's a tough one. Let me think about that for a minute. Let me try the left hand. Maybe it'll work this time. Einstein defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result the next time. By that standard, we're all insane.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what I hear you saying is that it, with Neitzsche is one, it assumes the answer in a sense. And in another way, you can't live any other way other than to try and live.
He tried to, and he literally went insane.
Yeah.
He spent the last 10 to 11 years in an insane asylum.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of pain.
It wasn't just his syphilis. It was his philosophy.
Yeah, that's heavy. Okay, so thank you. Jumping into goodness with conscience. Again, I think we see the intertwined nature of these transcendentals, because the same kind of micro illustration of the person who says, pornography only impacts me, and so it's not bad, it's not detrimental, and they reason through that. It is an ethical reasoning, especially, even for somebody because it's across the board. It's as much. You can
rationalize anything. We have such powers of reason, especially if we're intellectuals, that we can fool ourselves amazingly. We have here in the part of Boston, which is the Athens of America, the brains of the country, we have a saying, that idea is so insane, it must have been invented by a philosopher. Or alternatively, you'd have to have at least two Ph.D.s to believe that idea. That's because the cleverer you are, the more you can fool yourself. Farmers can't, a century or two ago, there were more farmers than philosophers. Now there's more philosophers than farmers. We're in deep doo-doo.
Is that do you run up against that wall pretty often in your line of work when you're reading stuff? Other philosophers,
yeah. When I'm interacting with ordinary people, students at Boston College, they're sane.
Yeah. But
if I dare to read philosophy journals, I say, if this is the world has gotten insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a organization of philosophers called the Society for the Study of Nothingness. And they study the concept of nothingness, and they publish a publication 4 times a year with a lot of words in it, saying nothing about nothing, and they're serious about it.
Wow. Have you ever tried reading one of the issues?
Oh yes. And to save my sanity, I stopped after a few sentences.
Didn't want to turn into Neitzsche. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. So I want to, okay. I'll ask a nerdy question real quick.
No, your question before, which I didn't answer, is after the transcendentals. The good and the beautiful both have something in common. We need to respect and love and conform to and obey and guide our lives by something greater than ourselves. you don't create truth, you discover truth.
Hmm.
And it usually surprises you. And you have to give up your prejudices and your preconceptions and your mistakes and your errors and your false premises. And the good, similarly, is uncompromising. You're not totally good. Our conscience tells us that. And that makes us feel some sort of guilt, and that's uncomfortable. True, you have to change. And the same is true with beauty, even though in a more delightful way. Here is something that you can't fully understand and conquer. You didn't invent it. It's wonderful. You're sort of out of, not so much out of control, but out of comprehension. If you see something beautiful, really beautiful, that gives you a kind of ecstasy or out-of-body experience, that's like mystical experience. You're drowning in it. It's over your head.
Yeah.
Little bits of beauty that we can control are just, passing.
Yeah.
And if that's all you can do, that's pretty shallow, but that's at least an oasis in the desert, a little relief. But real beauty, the music that breaks your heart, the art that breaks your heart, that's something that you're defenseless against. You may create art as a communication of beauty, but you don't create beauty itself any more than you create truth or wholeness. And since that's so special and rare and desirable and unusual and demanding and hard to do, we prefer the kind of truths that we make up, ideologies, the kind of goods that we make up, our own comfortable ethical systems, and the kind of beauties that we make up and that we can control. And that's certainly true in terms of sexuality. To give your whole self to another person, body and soul, in marriage, that's much more demanding than just to have a little part of it, a little bit of thrill. Either without babies or babies without sex. Your body without soul or soul without body.
Yeah.
Things up into parts, you can control them better.
Yeah.
But then they can't deal with the whole self. They can't break the whole part. They can't transform the whole person.
Doc, how do you propose somebody actively engage beauty and imagination in beautiful and holistic ways? Obviously, yeah, you've talked before about boredom. You've talked quite a bit about wonder in a lot of your books, and so I see people using their imaginations in a broken sexuality, but then I don't necessarily see a lot of Christians actively engage imagination and beauty in their redemption and following after Jesus and knowing Jesus with their imagination by way of beauty. And well, yeah, I guess I can pause there for a moment, just when it comes to boredom and wonder. Because people don't just watch porn because they're horny, they're turned on. So many people just watch it when they're bored, and a boredom would characterize our generation in a huge way. So when it comes to actively engaging wonder, how do you speak into that? How do you process through that?
Well, let's look at the psychology of it first. Boredom and wonder are opposites in that in wonder, you're connected with something bigger than yourself. When you're bored, there's something smaller than yourself. You're bigger than it, not big enough for you. So those are opposites. Now, the reason we're bored, the only possible reason is that we lack the thing that we're made for, the true and the beautiful. Which is God. But you have to have some sort of substitute. You have to worship something. So everything else is an idol. And the idols are smaller than we are, and God is bigger than we are. Even when you encounter God anonymously, even when an atheist covers the absoluteness of truth, or Camus, for instance, is at least an honest atheist. I don't think Parker is. That's the or when a skeptic discovers that his conscience is an absolute. And even though he may be skeptical of all sorts of things in morality, he can't be skeptical of morality itself. And he can't prove that, he just conformed to it. Otherwise, he's not truly himself. And when the beauty is so big that you can't control it, it results in tears, which is a strange thing. Why both joy and sorrow are expressed in the same way? Well, it's kind of overflowing. That's exactly the opposite of boredom. Now, most of our lives, for most of us, are passed between moments of deep boredom and moments of deep wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, boredom seems to be the default position in our society. So the cure for that can only be to provide the food that alone satisfies that hunger. And if goodness, truth, and beauty aren't just abstractions, but attributes of God, then that means the real presence of God is the only thing that's going to redeem us from that emptiness and nihilism.
I recall in your book on suffering, you make a statement something like, our society doesn't have resources for suffering, only 1,000 ways to avoid it. And so I want to know, because so many of us are addicted to stimulation. I am. That's something that I actively need to engage and fight against and practice where I give myself. Because if I don't, then a whole lot of other things are there to take me. And so I guess wondering if you see, that level of stimulation feeding into the problem of boredom and taking us away from wonder.
Yes, and the philosopher to read about that is Pascal. Whenever I teach him, and we come to the part of the Pensées, his great Apologetics, where he's talking about boredom and diversion, he says, you can deduce the origin of all the evils of human history from the simple fact you can't stand to be alone with yourself in your own room for 1 hour. And I tell my students, if you're insulted by that, try the experiment. And almost everybody who tries the experiment is very surprised at how different. I thought an hour had passed and it's only 5 minutes. And I wish there was somebody else in here, this room with me. Even the most boring person I ever met would relieve my boredom. Does that mean I find myself even more boring than the most boring person I ever met? Threatening experience. But there's something about us that's disturbing, and you can't slide past that or cover it over. You have to deal with it. It's a disease. It's not so much an intellectual disease of ignorance or a moral disease of deliberate sin. It's an aesthetic disease of boredom, of not encountering the thing that brings you out of yourself and you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. An aesthetic disease. I haven't heard that turn of a phrase before. It's striking. Yeah, so
aesthetics here, not just as fine arts, but as the whole realm of psychological experience and beauty.
Yeah, I'm with you. And alone in the room by yourself, that doesn't include with like a smartphone or with a laptop or anything like that. Just you in isolation for an hour.
Yeah. You just say hi there. You play a knock knock joke with yourself. Knock knock. Who's there? Nobody. Nobody who. Nobody you.
It sounds like you've tried this practice a time or two.
There's a terrifying scene in The Lord of the Rings. There's everything in The Lord of the Rings, by the way, where the chief of the Nazgul, the Black Riders, confronts Gandalf at the culmination of this great battle at the Gate of Gondor, and he throws back his helm, dressed in armor, and he doesn't have a face. There's just an emptiness. And the emptiness is infinite. That's terrifying because we see ourselves there. Maybe under all these social masks, there's nobody. There's a science fiction story which culminates in a terrifying scene. A cheap story, but it's a great scene. In the last scene, the hero, who's the world's last hope, goes mad, and he goes into his bathroom and turns on the light and looks at himself in the mirror, and little bits of his world has gradually been disappearing one by one, and the final stage of his insanity is he finds he has no faith.
Wow.
That's nightmare, I think, of modern man. That's what Kierkegaard's getting at in his book on despair. Despair of being somebody. And that, I think, is maybe a profound picture of hell. The popular idea that hell is simply physical fire that tortures you from outside is not nearly as terrifying as finding that you're all alone, there's nobody, not even yourself, inside.
Just empty, yeah. Yeah, so do you see our addiction to stimulation as a kind of medication away from self, a medication of avoidance, I suppose it would be?
Something to do. It's an idol. It's a sacrifice. It's a substitute. We have to do something. We itch, so we have to scratch. But it doesn't relieve the itch. I wish we were more pragmatic. I wish we would say, let's do what works. But instead we have too much faith, bad faith, wrong faith. It's got to work the next time. We're too optimistic. We haven't reached that point of despair where we can say, okay, I give up. And after you say, I give up, then there's some hope.
Sorry, I'm chewing on what you're saying.
To quote a great title, Cardinal Sarah's first book was entitled God or Nothing. Most of us think of God as simply the best alternative. No, it's not God or X, Y, or Z. It's God or nothing. Yeah. The alternative to the source of all goodness, truth, and beauty is no goodness at all, no truth at all, no beauty at all, no being.
I recall reading Camus' The Stranger. I wasn't even a Christian. I wasn't a Christian when I read it, and I absolutely loved the book initially. This guy who was confident and just apathetic, didn't care, but he was still able to live and he was still able to enjoy himself. And then like that incident happens where he murders a guy, goes to jail, and Camus tries to like paint this guy who's, while even as he's in jail, he's still kind of free because the jail, the jail isn't there, you know. He can go wherever he wants in his mind. And I remember getting to the end of that book and just feeling that sense of despair. I remember loving the beginning, loving the journey, and I get to the end and I hated it so much. And so I felt a sense of that where I was like, no, like I wasn't a Christian and I was trying to figure out alternative worldviews to live in.
It's a fake freedom. It's a fake freedom. It's intoxicating for a while. Yes. You know, there are no roads, there are no curbs, there are no cops, but it's just a desert. Yeah. If there are no roads, then there's nothing worth going to.
Yeah. I guess the converse of that would be, while I wasn't even a Christian, I went to Narnia. And I spent some time there, and You
went through the wardrobe, did you?
I did, yeah. Just fell right through. I was looking for drugs, and all of a sudden ended up in Narnia. And I didn't initially. So I enjoyed the journey initially. I started to not like the journey because I'm a sentimental person, and I found that every time they would go back, like hundreds of years would go by, and everyone they've ever loved, all the journeys they went through, everything was just in ruins, and everyone was dead. And so I started to hate the journey because that was paradigmatic of the ruin that I felt in my life and inside of me. And I remember just getting so angry. And then I finally get to the end, and they go to this place where everyone they've ever loved, and not just that, but every place they've ever loved is inside of this world, this kingdom. And something inside of me said, you were made for that place. And I just wept. I wept. And I shortly met Jesus after that. But the contrast of those two journeys, of the stranger, where I loved the beginning but hated the end, and then Narnia, where I disliked the journey but loved the end. And now every year I go back to Narnia to spend time there.
Well, you know, in Camus himself, there's an answer to his anti-hero, Rousseau, in The Stranger, who's a nihilist. It's Dr. Roux in The Plague. He's an atheist, but he's a saint. He says the meaning of life is to be a saint. And I don't understand how you can be a saint without God, and I don't have God, but I know that the meaning of life is to be a saint. So he risks his life. He's a kind of Mother Teresa. He heals these people who have no other doctor, the plague. And he can't understand his own behavior. He's at least in contact with a moral absolute, even though he can't believe in the intellectual absolute God.
Yeah. Cardinal Newman is good there, where he starts with conscience and then gets to goodness. And I love that particular orientation of the journey. He does it so well. He's brilliant.
I find it very effective because most people who aren't totally bummed out still have a conscience.
Yeah.
well, everybody has a conscience, but some of us are very good at suppressing it.
Yeah.
And even moral relativists who say, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. There's no universal 10 commandments for everybody. You ask them, do you think it's ever right for you to disobey your conscience? You've got your conscience, I got my conscience, all right, and they lead us in different directions. But how about somebody who deliberately does what his conscience bids him to do? You admire that kind of person. Nobody says, yes, I do. And you got one absolute left. Where'd that absolute come from? Conscience is nothing but the result of natural selection.
Yeah.
It's genetic. If it comes from the apes, why worship it? And if it's just the voice of society, why worship society?
Yeah.
You're to be a nonconformist. Just the voice of your parents. Are they God? Are they infallible?
Yeah. It
looks like it's a prophet of God. That's a kind of dangerous argument because it might turn them into total rebels, like some of Dostoevsky's characters, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, or Ben Karamazov, Brothers Karamazov. He tries to kill his conscience.
Yeah.
And he can't. You can't kill your conscience.
Yeah.
You can only suppress it, but it's down there.
Yeah, you even see that in Brothers Karamazov with his argument against God. His conscience is crying out for justice and goodness, and he's freaking out because of it. And
he's a wonderfully sympathetic atheist.
Yeah.
An honest moral atheist.
Yeah.
And we know from Dostoevsky's notes that there was going to be a sequel to the Brothers Karamazov in which Ivan would become a convert and a saint. But Dostoevsky died before he could write the sequel.
Wow. What a sequel that would have been.
Honest atheists are in a better position than dishonest theists.
That's a heavy thing to say. Yeah, I'm sympathetic to it. I just don't know how that works before, when they stand before God.
Well, the one person we're pretty sure is in hell, Judas Iscariot, was basically a dishonest theist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus himself said, all who seek will find.
Yeah.
So if the atheist is honest enough to be seeking God, he's promised that he'll eventually find him.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a seeker in that sense, and Jesus has great promises for those who seek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amen. Amen. Doc, thank you. Honestly, we've covered my questions and so much more. I've probably enjoyed the tangential stuff more than the scripted stuff. So thank you just for hanging out. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's good fun, and I think it's important. I think you've given a lot of our audience stuff to chew on when it comes to wonder and boredom and beauty and truth and reason and goodness. So I personally will continue to be chewing on that stuff. So thank you.
I think the two most effective Christian apologists of modern times are C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, because they baptize your imagination.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of your heart, even though you may be a moral rebel and an intellectual skeptic, there's a bit of your heart that's been baptized, and that's going to instruct the more conscious level.
Yeah. Amen. If people want to continue to track with your thoughts, like we noted earlier, you've written a bajillion books. How would people get connected with you, with your thinking? What's a good starting spot, that kind of thing?
Well, my website, peterkreeft.com, is managed by a friend of mine, Dave Nevins. I don't even visit my website because my relationship with cyberspace is approximately similar to the relationship of a galaxy made of matter to a galaxy made of antimatter.
Yeah.
When they touch, there's mutual self-destruction. But there's good stuff on my website and a lot of free downloads and a list of 80 books are still in print.
That's cool. Give the name of the website one more time.
peterkreeft.com.
Sweet. Doc, thank you for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it. Guys, thank you for tuning in. If you wouldn't mind, if you liked the conversation, check it out on YouTube. If you're just listening in, we're also The Naked Gospel on every podcast platform. Leave us a review, 5 stars, whatever, and continue to track with us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.